All right, welcome to the third video in our Getting Started series. We've covered the hub and we've covered the storyboard in previous episodes. So if you haven't seen those, be sure to check them out. Otherwise, we are now in our very first level. So I created a brand new level. You can see it's just an empty level, so there's nothing here. And I called it Getting Started. And if this is your first time in a new level, it can be a little disorienting, and there's a lot going on here. It looks simple. It is simple to a large degree, but there's also plenty to learn. So let's just jump into it. First things first, I want to show you how to add a object to your scene. I want to start with adding a new item to the scene because this is a very boring empty scene. I'm just going to click the add button here, and that opens up this window. Now there's a lot of objects that come with Max preloaded. I think over 1,000. You can also get objects through DLCs. You can get them from like websites like Sketchfab. I did a whole video on different websites that I use to get different objects. And there's also a video on how to import objects. So if you're not sure about that, you can watch those as well. But let's just use what we see here. You can see there's a whole bunch of different categories. Right now I'm just looking at view all. So if I scrolled through, I'd be scrolling through thousands of different objects. But let's look at one that I know is default. So any of these that you see that says something collection, basement collection, buildings collection, desert collection, those probably are all out of the box. They come with Max. So we'll stick with those because I know everybody has them. So here's the basement collection. I end up using this one quite a lot, actually, just because it's a pretty straightforward collection of assets. And if you click this button here, it's then subcategorized by the type of object that you're looking for. So if in my case, I just want a floor, so I can just drag in smooth concrete floor, and then there's our floor here. Now, if you press Shift, so let's suppose I drag this in here and I press Shift, then I can add more objects very easily. So I'm just holding down Shift and clicking where I want to put additional assets. And if we want to get rid of one, I just click on it. This is what I do. I click on it, I press the delete key, and it goes away. Okay. So now we just made a little floor. And now let's add some walls. So if we click on the walls category, here's our different walls. So let's just do this one here. This will be fine. And I'll hold down Shift and just we'll put that one there. Oops. If you place it in the wrong place, that's okay. Just get rid of that extra one. And we can just move them around with these little icons. Now this is what's called the widget. And I talked about this briefly in the last video, sort of. I talked about the settings. There are different settings that you can turn on, and this is one of those settings. So if you don't see this little widget, that's because you haven't turned it on yet. So just find it in the settings screen, click the box, and then you'll have that widget. I find it super helpful to be able to move things around. Okay. So we've already started to build a little room, and we can add more decoration to it. For example, we can add some, let's see, let's add a light. Why not? Let's put a light right here. That's a good spot. And now what I'm doing to move around the scene is I'm holding the right mouse button in, and then I'm using the W and S keys to move around, or WSD, all those moving around while I'm holding the right mouse button down. If I let go of that, to see the cursor comes back, I can still pan around, but what I can't do is this, right? So if you want to do both things at once, you want to hold that right mouse button down. Otherwise, you can pan in, pan out, left, right, etc. But I end up doing that. It's almost muscle memory at this point. So I would just try to get used to moving around that 3D space. But here we have a light, and we can add a light bulb to this because this is just a 3D object. It doesn't actually light up. What we want to do is add a light object to it. Just going to drag that in the scene, and you can see it's already lighting up a particular spot. I'm just going to drag that up to where it might be. So that kind of looks good. You can just play around with a shadow and get that just right. Now this is a constant light. So if I click on this light, yeah, you can see there's a whole bunch of different setting screens here for the object that I've clicked on. So like if I click on this one, I get different ones. Each one's a little bit different. Lights are a little bit different than most objects. And we can change, like, say, the color of the light. We can make it a point light, or we can make it a spotlight. The differences between here, these are all preset colors, but I can make any color I want. I can change the light distance. I can make it like much brighter. Be careful with this. Don't overlight your scenes and don't overdo the lighting, right? It's better to have one light light up a whole room than a whole bunch of little point lights that's just taking up resources that are unnecessary. And we'll talk about, optimization in a different video. But for now, just go easy. Right. So then we have the behavior. Every object can have a behavior, including lights. So you can see this light has a light behavior attached to it, which is called constant light. So it's just always on. Now, if I wanted to toggle the light, for example, that's a different behavior. So I'm just going to click on this big icon here, and that's going to open up our behavior library. And I can just scroll through here. It's already kind of pre-filtered for lights because it knows what it is. And what we want is, let's just do a toggle light, which I think is alphabetical. So you just got to scroll through and look for it. There's toggle light. Go, and we'll click add this behavior. And now we've changed it to a toggle light. Now, that light is currently on. So we want to untick this box, and that will make it off by default. So in order to turn it on, then we need something else. We need like a switch or something, like a light switch. Let's go and add that. I can click the add button here and type in switch. And you can see all the different switch type objects show up. Let's just use industrial button 1. So you click that and drag it into the scene. So we'll just put it right here. And so now we have a button, and this button has a behavior as well. So if we open this button up right now, it's not really, doesn't have anything selected. So we're just going to click this and assign it as a switch. And we'll just make it a plain switch. That one there. And configure the behavior. So we don't want it switched on by default. We want it to be off by default because the light's off by default. And this is going to tell you, what is it going to say when I click the button? How close do I need to be to the object in order to interact with it? What player level do I need to be? So if you're using a level system and you're leveling up and experience and everything, then you can kind of level gate something there. Can I use it multiple times, or is it single use? Does it trigger some NPC in the scene? Maybe you click on the light and all of a sudden a monster comes out. There's different things you can do there. Highlight item is, well, actually, I'll just show you. So if I do outline, for example, then the outline of this shape will highlight so that you can see that it's something that you can interact with. You could also do shape, and the whole shape of it would light up. So there's a whole video on that as well. I've done a lot of videos, so most of these things are already covered elsewhere. But for right now, I'm just going to say none. We don't really need it. The prompt display right now, it says local or screen. What this means is if you select local it means nearby or near the object in question, local to the object, versus screen, which will just always show up at the bottom center of the screen. Then the sound that you want to play when the button is clicked. And helpful tip, if you look up here, it'll tell you which, well, in most cases, it'll tell you which sound does what. Looks like this one, he may have accidentally left that out. That's okay. This is on, this is off, just FYI. So when I click the button here, and it'll play a sound, and there's a huge sound library that comes with Max as well, where you can import new sounds. It's pretty simple. If you just click this button here, you have the option to either go and source new sounds, import sounds that you already have, or add one that's already there. Okay. But now we need this to be logic linked. And this is probably one of the coolest things about Max is the behaviors are already written. All that coding is already done for you. And here, if I click this button, which is the visual logic connections, click that button, you can see these little yellow orbs. They're a little small, but here you can see it right there. This little orb shows up, and that tells you what's a dynamic object that can be linked. So I can link this to the light and it creates a connection. And we have options here. We can click here, we can toggle the light, we can just activate it or deactivate it when the button is clicked. In this case, it's a toggle light, so it makes sense to keep it that way. Let's go ahead and save our changes. It's important to keep saving all the time. It's just like anything else in life. You want to save and make sure that you don't lose progress in case something happens. And we're just going to click this button here. It says test level. And you'll be doing this a whole bunch. So I'm going to click this button. It's going to launch the level in a test mode. Okay, so we're in our little test scene here. In a moment, the HUD screen shows up. It just doesn't, it takes a second to load there, but it's there. It won't do that in standalone. It's just because of the test level. Ignore that for now, doesn't matter. But here's our light and our little switch. And if I get close enough to it, then I get the prompt text. And if I press E, then it turns on the light. There we go. We've done our first logic connection and used a behavior to do something in our scene. And that's pretty much how all of them work. You'll see if you watch all of my behavior videos, you'll see they're all pretty similar in the way they operate. There's obviously differences, and that's why I'm covering them, but very simple stuff. What else can we learn about the level editor? So there's these pre-built game elements here. You saw me use the light, for example, and I use that quite a bit. There's some pre-built zones, there's flags, checkpoints, things like that. Honestly, I don't use a lot of these. In fact, I would encourage you to stick to certain ones and maybe do things differently with others. So for instance, here's a zone. I'm going to drag a zone into the level, and I can move this around. I can kind of shape this by just changing these little orbs and kind of drag these about. What I found is you have to click the center, get the next orb, click the center, get the next orb to shape it. You can add a behavior to this as well in all these other settings, which we won't go into every single one of these. You get the idea. There's different zone related behaviors that you can put in there. And if I wanted, like, say, a tech zone, for example, or a checkpoint zone, or I think there's like a video zone or a sound zone, if I wanted any of those, I could use the pre-built ones. But what that does is it has a behavior attached to it by default. And I've found that sometimes those behaviors get updated, and the object in that game elements window doesn't always get the latest update. And so just as a matter of habit, what I've done is just started using these generic zones and then just changing the zone behavior. You can see it's already pre-filtered for marker. There's all the different marker type. So there's text in zone, for example. It's the exact same thing as this one here. So just, I find it a little bit better, more reliable to do it that way. There's the player marker. That's important. I should probably do a whole video just on the player marker, because check this out. There's so much to the player marker. We haven't even talked about the developer settings. So there's a ton to cover in this. That's probably its own little video. But for now, this is just where your player is going to start in your particular level. Now, if I go and I change something about this, if I click on this and then change, let's give him an Aztec spear, but then I change my mind about where I want him to start and I drag that in again, look at what happens. The spear went away. It's a new instance of that object. So it's just reverts to default. Be careful about that. It's probably better to just click and move the player around rather than creating a new instance and starting over. Then you have the particle button here. Now, this is a deep topic because there's a lot you can do with this. And in fact, I wouldn't consider myself an expert in it just yet. I want to read up on it. There's a guide for it if you want to read up on it. But just really quick, drag a particle in here. Now, particles are a little bit different than normal objects, just like lights are a little bit different than normal objects. But we can make like a little flame, for example. Sometimes it gets stuck. If you find it gets stuck with a particle, just try clicking save and seeing if that clears it off. And then it just clears that uh, old particle away, and then we have a flame. So if we had a little torch here, we could just add this particle effect. There's all kinds of different pre-built particles that you can choose from. If you have the booster pack, there's a whole bunch more, and then you can also create your own. So there's a particle editor right here. Like I said, that's kind of a topic for another day because it's a big one. But you can make custom particles for just about anything you can imagine. So I use that one a lot. I use the light a lot. I use the zone a lot. And to be honest with you, I don't really use a lot of these other ones very often. The only other two I feel like are notable are the environmental probe. I have a whole video on the environmental probe, so I'm not going to get into it because it's, again, another weighty topic. I don't use it a lot, but it can make a scene look a lot better. So do check that out. We also have flags. So if we have a flag, then we add a character. So let's just go to characters. Okay, so I just drag my character in here. Now this character has a pre-assigned behavior, but you can always change the behavior. Let's make it a patrol. Here we are, patrol. Click on that. Now we can logic link the character to the flag, and the character will patrol. So we can add additional flags. So let's suppose we wanted this character to move around the scene. Then we can just tell it, okay, go from here to there, and then from there to there, and so on, and it'll patrol. When it reaches the end, it'll go back. Or you could circle around if you wanted to, whatever you want to do. But you can control the character's movement in that way with the flags. Doesn't come up a lot for me just because I don't use characters very often for the scenes that I do. But if I were doing a game with a character in it, I would certainly use that. But most of these other ones like image zone, wind zone, sound zone, all those things, you can just add a generic zone and then add the behavior. And that way you're going to get the latest behavior that way. It's just a little simpler, I think. Let's see. Objects have a whole bunch of settings. I don't want to get into all this just because it seems like it would take a long time to get through. Watch some of my videos on the behaviors, and I'll talk about the difference between physical objects versus static objects. An object needs to be physical in order to be dynamic. Those are basically one and the same. You can't create, you can't add a behavior to a static object. So you have to make it physical. Now, whether it has physics on or physics off, that depends on the object. Obviously, a wall is going to have physics on. You don't want it moving if it's a wall, so then you make it immobile. What the collision shape is, all those things, just poke around in it, and I think you'll get this sense for those. And then you can assign a behavior to it. You can change things like its materials. So like these are all pre-assigned materials, but if I wanted this wall to look different, I could just change the textures in here and make it look like an entirely different wall with the same object. It's just a square, right, or rectangle. And then we have the developer settings. These are all covered in the manual. So again, I don't want to go into depth on this, but check the manual out and that'll explain anything in here that's not explained in the video. Here's one thing that will come in handy though. Sometimes it's nice to have the grid on, and sometimes it's nice to have the grid off. It just depends on what you're doing. If you have the grid on, you can change the grid position and this how big the grid is based on these settings here, or you can just use the snap mode and it'll just snap to whatever the grid settings are. So for instance, if I have this object here and I drag it, it just snaps into place. But sometimes that's not what you want. Maybe you want to be, maybe you want to leave a little gap in the wall. Yeah, you can just drag it out, or if you want to really fine tune it, you could take the snapping off. Maybe we just want like a little, like if I got this close with snap on, it would just snap immediately. So we don't want that. So we can just leave that there, take the grid off, and that'll let you do that. You can rename objects too. So this is by default damp brick wall. Sometimes it's important to rename an object, especially if you're using a behavior that's referencing the object. You want to make a specific name. Most of the time, you're not going to do that, especially with static objects, but special objects. Like, for instance, let's suppose this gap indicated that, oh, there's a secret room back here. And if I click this button, then the door opens and it's like a secret chamber. Then you would want to name this something different so that you can find it easy. Let me show you that. So let's see. Let's change this to secret. Let's just call it secret. Okay. So there's this button here. Veterans of this software don't know this exists. Okay. But if you click this button here and you can see that you can change the search, alphabetical, newest to oldest. I use detailed objects, especially in a big scene where I'm trying to find a small object in a big scene, or I just want to jump to it. And I'll change to details. And then if we scroll through here, some of these are just like when we get the project system, you won't see all of this in here. It's because I'm using a testing environment and I've used a whole bunch of stuff in there. But so you can use this section to jump directly to an object in your scene. So for instance, let's suppose you're way off in the distance and you want to jump back to where the player start marker it is. If you zoom out by a lot, it can be very hard to find what you're looking for. And so what we can do here is we can find the player start marker, for example. There's only one, click on it, and it jumps me straight to that object. These buttons, obviously we talked about save and launch, but here's the terrain painting and terrain editor. So let's suppose I start with a blank map like this, but then I want there to be, some trees or grass or something. That I can click this button, and that opens the terrain generator, and I can sculpt the terrain any way I see fit. I can make a big hill. Oops, don't do that. I can make a big hill over there, for example, and I can give it maybe some grass, make it a grassy knoll or something, and we can add grass and trees. Now you'll find that if you check this box, it's going to enable trees for the entire map. So I'm just going to do that. See all these trees. Maybe you don't want all these trees. So usually what I do is I will enable the trees and then just clear them all off and then just put them down where I want them. So you have these buttons here that'll say, okay, I just want to add this tree right there. So it's pretty simple to just generate some scenery. It's important for levels that are, let's say it's an indoor level, but you're looking at a window. It's important not to be looking at this weird gray square. So you just put some scenery in the background to kind of make it look a little bit more full, as if it's a full level. You would do the same thing with like different terrains and different trees, different grasses, and so on and so forth. Go back to object tools, because if you still have this, you try to add in a object, it'll still be in the terrain sculpting and possibly mess up some of your settings. So just be careful there. Let's see, we have the environmental effects. So when we click on this could be its own video. I'm not going to get into depth, but just click around in here. The thing you're going to see the most is you're going to see like the custom sky, for example. Right now, this scene has no sky. There's no skybox being used. Now we can use simulated sky, which is kind of a procedural thing. And if we do that, then those clouds, if you look really closely, you have to look really closely, but those sky clouds are moving. Right here, you can see the kind of pixels a little bit. Or you can use a skybox. Now, I have a whole video on skyboxes, so I'm not going to get into depth, but skybox are more like a static picture. But oftentimes, how often are you really looking at the sky in a game? So it might be what you want. Just kind of depends on what you're doing. Take it back to none. We can also change the lighting in the scene. So for instance, there's some presets. So we can go, I'm going to go back to simulated sky for now. And there's morning, here's afternoon. Look at the shadow and see what it does. Dusk, right? Let's do dawn, right? So there's some presets, or you can really dial it in with the cloud density and the cloud coverage and all that stuff. So you can get really, really pedantic with this, but I usually don't spend a whole bunch of time with it. But I'm not making like whole games either. So it just depends on what you're doing. We'll go back to midday. There we go. Music tracks where you add like, ambient sound, for example. So if we're outdoors, maybe hear like birds or something. You can do custom combat tracks for when there's a combat encounter. Uh, Filter effects. These are what are called LUTs, which is short for lookup table. Again, huge topic. Don't want to get into it, but there's some presets here. There's also a member of the community that's made like a LUT generator that's pretty cool. You can make your own custom LUTs. Uh, lots of fine tuning to do. I do a whole video on this section here alone, which talks about optimization. So it'll explain all of that for you. Post processing and shadows. This is stuff that even I get a little bit uh, overwhelmed with what you can do, because I honestly, all this is explained in the documentation, but I don't have it memorized and I don't really pay much attention to it. I think this is when you're getting into like a legit project, that's when you're going to be paying attention to things like post processing. But it's all there for you if you need it. You can do weather. Now, the weather is not great, right? Like it's not bad, don't get me wrong, but it's not great. It's not like what you might see. Like here, you can actually see it happening right there. It's not terrible, but it's not like, premium, it's not what you'd see in like Unreal or something like that. And it's a placeholder. It's a start. It's not a finish, right? So I think over time, as GameGuru Max gets more and more developed, you could probably anticipate this getting even better. But right now, if you just want some weather to kind of, get a feel for what it might be like later on, then you get the weather effect going. And it's, like I said, it's not too bad, but it could be better. Same thing with like the snow, for example, probably be better, but not bad. At least it's something. Something's better than nothing. The editor light, I use that a lot, especially indoor scenes and especially darker scenes. So if I'm turning off if I want it to be a really dark, like a pitch black scene, that's pitch black for me even in the editor. So I'll turn on the editor light, and what that does is it just creates a little light object. So let me show you. If we take the lighting all the way down, we get it really dark, all these to black, right? And I turn this off, turn this on, pretty clear what it does, right? It creates this little light for you to be able to work. But it's not an actual part of the scene. It's not going to stay there. So you can use that just to be able to, do your work and then turn it off and see what it looks like. So that's pretty helpful. That's good enough. All right. And then let's see the camera view. Again, I don't use it very often, but I'll just show you what it does. So click on this button. So right now I'm right above the scene. And if I click on that, then it just looks straight down. That's just a quick way to look straight down at the scene. It'd be good for kind of getting a lay of the land, but again, doesn't come up very often. Let's see, this will open the user guide. So there's multiple ways to get to the user guide. And I would encourage you to check that out if you're new. So there's a whole tutorial video on smart objects. I think smart objects is a generous term. I'm not a big fan of the smart object system, if I'm being honest with you. It can be somewhat useful. You can take some objects. Let's suppose you didn't want to slide in each individual one of these objects over and over again, right? Let's just get rid of all this stuff here. Okay. And we wanted to make a smart object out of this. Let's move this guy out of the way too. We could, I'm holding shift and I'm using the left mouse button just like you would in any other program to select all of these. And then I can create a smart object. So I'm going to group them. And that creates an object that can then be repopulated. The reason I don't like them, there's a couple of different reasons. One, they can be a little clunky sometimes. Sometimes if you're using them a lot, they can get out of sort. It's kind of hard to explain, but I've had walls change direction on me and things like that. And I think it's just a bug. I think it's a feature that could be useful for quick work, but also could end up costing you a bunch of time if you experience some sort of bug. And I think if we give it enough time, they'll work out all those little kinks and make it really useful. But for right now, honestly, I just avoid them when I can. But you can save an object. So if you create a group and you want to reuse it over and over again, then you can save it and name it, and it becomes a new object that you can just call back anytime you want. You can also ungroup. So if you click on this button here, you got to be on an object that's grouped, and then you can ungroup it, and then it becomes an individual object again. I don't think I'm doing that right. Oh, I have to be on the group tab, and then I can ungroup, and then they become individual objects again. But that is everything I can think of about the level editing scene. If you enjoyed the video, or if you learned anything new, please be sure to click the like button down below. That helps me out, helps the channel grow. If you're new here, or if you just haven't subscribed yet, would love to have you stick around. Please be sure to subscribe. And then lastly, if you'd like a notification for whenever new videos are posted, just click the bell icon, and that'll let you know when a new video is ready. But thanks so much for watching all the way through. I really appreciate it. I hope it's been helpful, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now. Hey, don't forget there's a written guide for every behavior, including ones I haven't yet covered on this channel. And if you want to learn some more, why don't you check out this video next.